The afternoon sun dipped low over the rolling hills, casting long shadows across our ranch cabin's wraparound porch. A warm breeze rustled through the tall grass, carrying with it the scent of pine and fresh earth. My wife, Rachel, had just finished unloading supplies from the truck, her uniform shirt untucked, sleeves rolled up, and her badge concealed beneath a light jacket. She looked every bit the part of a hard-working rancher's wife, strong, capable, and at home in the wilderness. Little did our neighbor know, beneath that calm exterior beat the heart of our town's police chief. We'd owned the ranch for years, a quiet slice of heaven at the edge of the HOA's boundary, where we tried our best to keep to ourselves. But peace wasn't what Karen wanted. Karen, our self-appointed neighborhood enforcer, was the type who took the HOA handbook more seriously than the law itself. She'd complained about the color of our barn, the way we stacked firewood, and even how our dog barked at coyotes at night. Today, it seemed, she had a new mission. It started with the crunch of tires on gravel. I looked up to see Karen's pristine white SUV crawling up the drive like a predator stalking prey. The windows were down, and even from a distance, I could see the tightness in her jaw and the determination in her eyes. She came to a halt right at the edge of our porch, stepping out with a clipboard clutched in her hand like a weapon. "Excuse me," she barked, her voice sharp enough to cut through the peaceful afternoon. Rachel paused, wiping sweat from her brow, and raised an eyebrow, saying nothing. I stayed seated, curious where this would go. "This cabin is not compliant with HOA guest policy," Karen declared, glancing at her clipboard. "And you," she said, jabbing a finger at Rachel, "have no authorization to be on this property. I don't know who you are, but I'm calling the sheriff to have you removed." Rachel's eyes narrowed just slightly, but her stance remained relaxed. "This is my home," she said calmly. Her voice had that quiet authority that came naturally to her, the kind that usually made people stop and listen. "But not Karen. Don't you lie to me. I know the real owners of this place." Karen snapped. She wasn't interested in listening. "You're trespassing, and I have every right to have you arrested. People like you think you can just come here and do whatever you want." Before we could respond, she was already on her phone, dialing frantically, pacing in little angry circles on the gravel. "Yes, I need an officer out here immediately. There's a woman trespassing on private property, and she's being aggressive." She cast a venomous look at Rachel as she spoke. Rachel exchanged a glance with me, and I could see the humor flicker in her eyes despite the tension. She folded her arms, leaning casually against a porch post, waiting. It didn't take long for the sound of sirens to break the quiet. A county cruiser pulled up the drive, dust billowing behind it. Karen stood tall, triumphant, as the deputy stepped out. But the moment the officer recognized Rachel, his posture changed. His eyes widened slightly in surprise, and then he tipped his hat in respect. "Chief," he said, trying to suppress the grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. Karen's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Chief," she echoed, confusion washing over her like a cold wave. Rachel straightened and stepped down from the porch, her badge now clearly visible as she pulled back her jacket. "Afternoon, Mike," she said to the deputy. "Looks like we had a little misunderstanding." Karen stared at the badge as if seeing it conjured from thin air. You're the police chief." She stammered, her voice small now, the arrogance draining from her tone. "I am," Rachel said, her voice steady. "And this is my property. My husband and I live here. Now, is there anything else you need, ma'am?" Karen tried to find her footing, but the ground had shifted beneath her. I thought there was a mistake," she mumbled, backing toward her SUV, the clipboard now clutched against her chest like a shield. The deputy cleared his throat, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Ma'am, I think everything's in order here. Maybe best to head on home." Red-faced, Karen climbed back into her vehicle, avoiding eye contact. She gunned the engine a little too hard, tires kicking up gravel as she made her retreat, the queen of the HOA dethroned, at least for today. As the dust settled, Rachel turned to me with a wry smile. "Guess I should have worn my badge on my hat, huh?" I laughed, pulling her into a hug. Nah, watching her face when she realized was worth it. The ranch fell quiet again, save for the wind in the trees, and the knowledge that Karen might just think twice before crossing that line again. The days that followed that unforgettable encounter were strangely quiet, at least at first. The usual stream of petty complaints from Karen seemed to dry up overnight. No notes left on our gate. No passive-aggressive emails forwarded from the HOA board. No unannounced visits under the guise of checking on the property. Rachel and I enjoyed the silence, savoring the rare peace that had settled over our ranch. For a brief moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, Karen had learned her lesson. But of course, it was only the calm before the storm. Late one morning, as I was repairing a section of the pasture fence, I spotted Karen's SUV parked down the hill near the entrance to the community trail that ran adjacent to our land. She wasn't alone this time. A small group had gathered around her, neighbors I recognized from HOA meetings. They huddled together like conspirators, stealing glances in the direction of our cabin, their heads nodding in agreement as Karen spoke with animated gestures. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the familiar fire in her eyes. She hadn't given up, she was regrouping. When I mentioned it to Rachel that evening, she simply smiled, brushing the dust from her boots. Let her play her games, she said. Sooner or later, she'll cross a line she can't explain away. And sure enough, that line came quicker than we expected. It started with a letter. Not the usual form letter from the HOA, but a personal one, handwritten in tight, angry script on official HOA letterhead. It accused Rachel of abusing her authority, of intimidating neighbors, of creating a hostile environment. It claimed our livestock were a nuisance, that our dogs barked too much, that our porch lights violated light pollution rules. The letter concluded with a veiled threat: failure to correct these issues would result in further action by the HOA board, up to and including legal proceedings. Rachel read it over her coffee, expression unreadable. When she finished, she folded it neatly and slid it across the table to me. What do you think? She asked. I smirked. I think Karen's desperate. And I think it's time we show her what further action really looks like. Rachel nodded thoughtfully. She spent the afternoon drafting a formal response, not as a homeowner, but as the town's police chief. She reminded the HOA of property boundaries, of the legal limits of their authority, and of our rights under state law. She cited case precedents, zoning regulations, and specific ordinances that protected agricultural activity on rural properties like ours. Every line was precise, professional, and firm. And when she signed her name at the bottom, she made sure to include her title in bold letters. We delivered the letter in person to the HOA office, where Karen also happened to be volunteering that day. The look on her face as Rachel handed the envelope across the counter was priceless, shock mingled with the dawning realization that her latest scheme was unraveling before it even began. But Karen wasn't finished. A week later, we discovered a set of fresh survey markers staked suspiciously close to our property line. They weren't there before, bright orange flags fluttering in the breeze, as if daring us to react. I found Rachel studying them one morning, arms crossed, eyes narrowed in thought. She's trying to claim we've encroached on common land, Rachel said quietly. Trying to build a case for the board. And what do? I asked. Rachel smiled, slow and confident. We call in the county surveyor. Official measurements. On record. Within days, the county crew arrived, instruments in hand, mapping every inch of our boundary with precision. Karen lurked at a distance, watching from the edge of the trail, arms folded tight. When the final report came in, it was clear. Our fences were well within our legal property lines. The surveyor even pointed out encroachments by the HOA's own landscaping onto our land. Armed with the report, Rachel hosted a meeting with the HOA board, inviting them to our cabin, offering coffee on the porch, all charm and professionalism. She laid out the facts, the false claims, the harassment, the legal rights we held. She wasn't confrontational, but there was no mistaking the steel in her voice. The board members, many of whom had likely been dragged into Karen's crusade reluctantly, listened in silence, nodding in agreement. Karen, seated stiffly at the end of the table, said nothing. By the end of that meeting, the board issued a formal apology. They promised to rein in Karen's overreach and to respect our rights as property owners. It was a victory, not just for us, but for common sense. Later that evening, as we watched the sun set over the hills, Rachel leaned back in her chair, a contented sigh escaping her lips. Think she'll finally leave us alone? I asked. Rachel chuckled softly. Karen, no. But next time she tries something, she'll think a lot harder about the consequences. The ranch was quiet again. But this time, the peace felt earned. And we knew that whatever came next, we'd face it together, stronger for the battles we'd already won.